I'll do it anyway. Introduction. Why should anyone listen to me? Or, as the Americans would say, what's a big idea? Why should anyone listen to me, a social media bum who hasn't had a proper job in decades? I did manage to pass my bar exams and graduated with a degree in law. Prior to that, I worked as a legal secretary before marrying and becoming a mother. My only qualification is my interest in religion, politics, philosophy, and my belief that every problem has a solution, even if it is never used. Over the years, I have picked up some knowledge of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, as well as Western history and culture, though not through academia. As a political activist and a moral and political philosopher, wishing to define nationalism as government in the national interest, I have concluded that the breakdown of the rule of law in the West has led to the breakdown in trust and confidence in the government, which are twin factors that exacerbate each other. Who am I to claim I have all the solutions to a declining global empire apparently suffering from amnesia and dementia? Not only do I claim to have a solution, I also claim to have the only viable solution that is morally and intellectually respectable based on deduction and religion. But on to more bread and butter matters. I was born in Malaysia, a Muslim country. I came to England when I was 15 as a student and stayed. Why should anyone listen to me? Because I have a narrative I believe is both morally and intellectually satisfying, that is novel and unique, helpfully incorporating the theology and narrative of the Abrahamic faiths. I like to think I present the problem and solution with exceptional clarity and simplicity. What do I know that others don't? It is just possible that I have exceptional powers of deduction, but perhaps the real reason I have come to anyone's attention at all is that I am primarily known for saying the same thing consistently for many years, that the solution to Western political problems is the replacement of Christianity and liberalism with a one-party theocracy based on Quranic principles. If it is indeed the case that liberalism, which gradually replaced Christianity over the centuries, is a problem, what is the problem? While I am aware that my solution is radical and unpopular, I am still convinced that it is nevertheless the solution. There is no requirement for anyone to like it, just as there is no requirement for a patient suffering from gangrene to like the only treatment that would prevent death: amputation. It is probably my exceptional powers of being able to endure endless repetition and the desire to see what happens next that keeps me in my role as propagandist for possibly the most unpopular idea in the West. A few people over the years have commented that I am a propagandist with messianic zeal. Bemused, I've suggested I might be the incarnation of Solon, the Athenian poet and social reformer, or Maimonides as a way of appealing to Jews. Since I know that the narrative of Islam does not permit a prophet later than Muhammad. Remembering a scene in Life of Brian when his mother informed the crowd that he was not the Messiah, but a very naughty boy, I imagine my mother saying something similar. Aware of my activities, she does take an interest in my visits to Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, London, accusing me of being a crank and wondering if I have any friends because of my political views. Fortunately, I have been able to make an old male friend speak to her on the telephone, and even given her photographic evidence of my outings with the few friends that I still have. My interest in politics goes back to childhood memories and of my extended family gathered at my late grandfather's house talking politics on Sundays, and later to listening to my father discussing politics with friends and associates. For some reason, even as a child, I felt the solutions were obvious and grew frustrated at the reasons, or excuses as I thought they were, given for not adopting the obvious solution. I felt the reasons given were irrational, superstitious, or evidence of social, moral, and intellectual cowardice. At the time, At the time, I felt the West was more rational and not beset by a minefield of taboos in middle age. I discovered that political problems were really moral problems, and moral problems have their origins in a lack of principled conviction. Fundamentally, the problem as I see it is that the concept of principles is no longer grasped. A childhood memory was that of my mother pointing out something my father had done that she felt was unprincipled. I cannot remember the matter in dispute and rather doubt she would either, or my father if he was still alive. He died in 2020. A principle is something you make a point of doing or never doing, whether it results in praise, reward, or punishment. It is this that Westerners no longer understand, rendering them no better than cattle, easily controlled with carrot and stick. Widespread atheism means Westerners regard any inconvenience, loss of status, income, or property suffered as punishment, while dismissing belief in the afterlife as stupidity, resulting in lost opportunities of pleasure and profit in the only life they have. Since principles come from moral principles and moral principles come from religious principles, all those who subscribe to the moral system of religion enjoy the group solidarity that enables group cooperation. To be compelled to subscribe to a moral system by declaring your religion means you will be judged according to whether you uphold the principles of your group. On this matter, you will be judged by members of your religious group as well as by those outside your group. This is essentially the purpose of religion, dividing us into competing groups so that we compete against each other in righteousness, so that the best religion is easily distinguished from the rest. As well as being a political activist, I am a social and political scientist promoting the political philosophy of nationalism, which I define as government in the national interest. It would be in the national interest to adopt the best moral system available. How are we to judge which moral system is best? If the purpose of morality is to keep the group in existence and apart from others, then the one most effective at doing this would be Judaism, since Jews are the world's most ancient and powerful tribe, apparently indestructible and enjoying divine protection from the Abrahamic God who made Jews his chosen people. But we don't want to be Jews, do we? It's too hard to deal with the anti-Semitism and the oppression and restriction that Judaism requires if you want to do it properly. Now, shall I read chapter 2? I suppose I will until Chad stops me or until I grow tired. I'll continue. Chapter 2, what is the problem? In a word, idolatry. Idolatry is the worship of anything that isn't God, bearing in mind that according to the 13 principles of Judaism, God cannot take material or physical form. This means even the pantheist monotheism of worshipping the universe as one deity makes one guilty of idolatry. Spinoza was excommunicated for the heresy of rejecting the narrative of the Abrahamic God in order to reject his religious duty to obey his laws and live as a Jew and in the Amsterdam of the 17th century. Spinoza was the first secular Jew of Europe, believing he would be able to live more happily outside the Jewish community of Amsterdam than within it. To my astonishment, Jewish scholars for some reason do not immediately attribute the reason for excommunication to idolatry, even appearing to consult each other as to why his offense was not specified. If Maimonides correctly stated that Jews are not to conceive of God as in any way material, then for Spinoza to equate God with the universe is a clear transgression of this prohibition, making him guilty of idolatry. Those who want to claim the respectability of monotheism while rejecting the laws of the Abrahamic God will use pantheism as a defense, so they can say, "Not today, thank you very much. We are already monotheists, even if we are not ethical monotheists. We don't want to be ethical monotheists because we don't want to be subject to the restrictions of Jews and Muslims. Only the law of the land which will be more permissive. In any case, you will be unable to argue successfully that the universe was created. What if the universe was always there? Then there would be no need for it to be created, would there? If the universe always existed, then there would be no need for the Abrahamic God to create it. If the Abrahamic God does not exist, then we need not obey his laws." But what about the Big Bang? Who or what caused the Big Bang? Scientists are silent, but theists have the answer. If we are here because there was a creation, then there must have been a creator, and that creator must have been the supreme and eternal Abrahamic God, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, and perfectly moral, believed to have communicated twice with mankind through the Torah and the Quran. If God took the trouble of making laws for humanity, it can be deduced that he intended for them to be followed. If he intended for them to be followed, punishment must follow in the event of disobedience. Are we not being punished for our idolatry? We do not have to be actually bowing before idols to be guilty of idolatry, because there is such a thing as hidden idolatry. A Jew or Muslim apparently praying correctly by his own religious standards could still be guilty of hidden idolatry because it is thought crime. Instead of one's thoughts being concentrated on praying to God and thanking him, they stray from obedience to his laws to plans to break them, for example, by plotting the downfall of our enemies whom we envy. Another thought crime, using ways and means forbidden, such as lashon hara, known as evil speech, or thinking sinful thoughts. Let us assume that God in his wisdom has so arranged the universe that the sin is its own punishment. If that is the case, then everything happens for a reason. If everything happens for a reason, I'll keep going, thank you, Chad. If that is the case, then everything happens for a reason. If everything happens for a reason, then suffering must be punishment for sin, or the teaching of an important lesson to humanity by God. As for the problem of evil, we must assume, if we want to enter into a bargain with the Abrahamic God, that good will be rewarded and evil punished in this life or the next, and that he that he never promised us a rose garden or heaven on earth. If we suffer trials and tribulations, these things are sent to try us for our fitness to go to the better place in our afterlife. What page are we on? We're on page 16. There are 106 pages, but it's in large print. To continue, the important point to note is that the existence of evil does not negate the existence of God, since evil is necessary to our understanding of good and is the logical and necessary price for it, in the same way that we must be able to understand the concept of heat to know its opposite of cold, just as we know that up is the opposite of down. Whether or not you believe in God, it cannot be denied that if you are an idolater, you would not be taking any guidance from either the Torah or the Quran, taking you out of the Abrahamic religions. Since Christians are in fact guilty of idolatry, they cannot be said to be guided by either the Torah or the Quran. It is a matter of historical record that Christians worship Jesus as the co-equal of the God of Israel, who is also Allah. The most powerful churches in the world affirm the Trinity: Catholic, Anglican, and Orthodox. It is also a matter of fact that the Trinity requires the worship of an executed blasphemer as the co-equal of the supreme and eternal Abrahamic God who created the universe. And that is by definition idolatry. While Christians claim that Jesus is God, there is no authority for this proposition other than the nonsensical assertions of the Athanasian Creed not contained in the New Testament. Even if the New Testament categorically stated that Jesus is God, which it does not. The document itself lacks unity of authorship. It is not claimed, even by Christians, that the New Testament comes from Jesus, let alone God. As for Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, and Paul, it cannot be successfully argued that in a rational and honest world that the word of mortal and fallible men of dubious provenance claiming to have met an executed blasphemer could ever trump the word of God in the Torah or the Quran. It is the Christian narrative that Jesus was executed for blasphemy, and the historical record is that Christians under Arianism and Trinitarianism have been worshipping Jesus as divine, thereby offending against the commandments of God, specifically forbidding idolatry and blasphemy. If you believe Jesus is still alive, you believe he is immortal. If you believe he is immortal, you must believe him to be divine. If you believe Jesus to be divine, you are ipso facto guilty of idolatry, which is a mortal sin. Worse, according to the Christian narrative, Jesus was convicted and crucified for blasphemy. It is on record that Christians have been worshipping an executed blasphemer for the best part of 2,000 years, either as Arians or Trinitarians. How can such blatant transgression against the clearly stated commandments of God have gone uncorrected for 2 millennia? The answer is totalitarian state intimidation. It was through state intimidation of the subjects of Christian monarchs who never enjoyed freedom of belief in Europe until the founding of the American Republic. Christian monarchs of Europe required their subjects to follow their religion under the principle of cuius regio, eius religio, the Latin meaning of whose realm their religion. This means that the only people in Europe who had a different religion to their monarch were Jews, being the senior branch of the Abrahamic faiths who had special status. But for Judaism, there would be no Jews. But for Jews, there would be no Jesus for Christians to worship. The entire edifice of Christianity depended on the existence of Jews, and and the existence of Jews as a people depended on the practice of Judaism. While officially Jews were allowed their own religion, they were resented. Repeated attempts were made to forcibly convert Jews to Christianity with the goal of declaring Judaism and Jews finally extinct. But Christians wavered between ruthlessly and forcibly converting them to Christianity and refraining from bullying them into conversion, playing nice cop and nasty cop in turn. Christian monarchs did not succeed in converting European Jewry into Christianity before themselves losing interest and belief in their own religion. We must, however, give credit where credit is due. Christianity raised their standards of sexual morality by imposing monogamy, and monogamy produces the most stable kind of society. Under the Roman Empire, pederasty and other forms of extramarital sex were culturally accepted. Under Christianity, fornication, adultery, and sodomy became sexual offences. Because Christian beliefs were so absurd, monarchs had to sponsor art, music, and architecture to attract subjects otherwise unwilling to give up their Sundays to participate in the religion of their monarch. It must be for this reason that European music, art, and architecture came to be seen to be aesthetically, culturally, and architecturally superior to non-European art forms, precisely because it had financial sponsorship of Christian monarchs. European music and art easily outclasses the primitive gongs and cymbals of Eastern places of worship with their crude and gaudy idols, while Orientals were allowed to go to their places of religious worship as and when the need arose in them. Europeans were required to attend church every Sunday or else be fined or punished or to have their status lowered for not being a paid-up member of their church. However, the imperial advantages of organized religion easily outweighed civilizations whose people were not subject to its restrictions. After all, it is Christians who acquired three global empires and not Muslims, Hindus, or Buddhists. As for Jews, they are left in the curious position of having one of their number worshipped by Christians as a co-equal of their God of Israel who created the universe, and having to deal with Christians throughout the ages who have not been able to finally decide on the best ways of dealing with Jews. Whatever the cultural and social benefits of Christianity Europeans enjoyed over the centuries, it is now a spent force. The oppressive totalitarianism of Christianity could only have been rejected by educated men, such as the founding fathers of the American Republic, who understandably resented being required to pretend to believe in an absurdity that Jesus is the co-equal of the Abrahamic God who created the universe. What form did this oppressive and violent totalitarianism take? The last man in Britain burned at the stake for heresy was Edward Whiteman in 1612. The last man to be executed for that was Thomas Aikenhead in 1697. The American Revolutionary Wars began in 1765 and the American Republic was founded in 1776. The flip from an absolute monarch enforcing Christianity on his subjects to a republic protecting freedom of belief took place in under a century after the practice of heretic burning ceased. What was the purpose of the American Revolutionary War? To reject monarchy and the religion that supported it, Christianity. That was the beginning of the end of Christianity and monarchy for Europeans, confirmed in the French Revolution and reconfirmed in the Russian Revolution. In China, its monarchy ended in 1911. In the monarchy republic debate, it is clear that a meritocratic republic has a deeper, wider, and bigger pool of political talent from which to draw the next national leader and ruling class than an elitist royal family. This must be the way forward for the political advancement of humanity, bearing in mind that monarchy did not succeed in giving Jews continuing access to their homeland, that their best and wisest cosmopolitan king was King Solomon, whose kingdom was divided into two after his death because of the divisive policy of his son. After Solomon, the ancient kingdom of Israel declined until it was taken over by the Romans. There is no demand amongst modern Israelis for the return of monarchy, nor that of a Torah theocracy. Indeed, Israel is another fallen civilization practicing liberal democracy, just as the rest of the West is. Unfortunately, the problem is liberal democracy itself, since it has created the degenerate matriarchy that the West now is, suffering from the dementia of intersectional feminism, a polite word for the policies of Sodom and Gomorrah. The global homo gayplex, or transnational progressivism, if you prefer, allows and encourages sexual liberation from the rules of marriage and good parenting. If feminism operates through bribing men with cheap extramarital sex, when did this practice begin? In a well-ordered patriarchy, respectable women wishing to marry and remain married would know to avoid a reputation of promiscuity. However, beginning from the swinging 60s, the lowering standards of sexual morality began, and fornication was a gateway sexual offense leading to the degeneracy of widespread illegitimacy, the civil partnership, gay marriage, and now the promotion of transgenderism in primary school children. It seems Westerners have now degenerated into such a basket of deplorables that they are no longer fit for employment, which is presumably why their government replaces the indigenous with foreigners, because they are more prepared to work. However, since Western government now hates having any dealings with those it presumes to govern, it is now busily warehousing Westerners for extinction, discouraging marriage, legitimate offspring, parents from staying married, while encouraging sterile, childless relationships, as well as encouraging impressionable primary school children to sterilize themselves to better masquerade as members of the opposite sex. When the next generation of transgender people discover that their lives have not miraculously improved after their sex change, they will commit suicide in droves, a form of government disposal for unwanted people it disdains to govern. If you have parents who have allowed you to opt out of having children by being gay or transgender, thereby making you unmarriageable, you will be deemed to have opted out of being a member of the human race, in theory capable of enjoying the right to have legitimate offspring, since you have made yourself unmarriageable. While Westerners think of Christianity as the official religion of the West, they do not seem to have registered that no Christian theologian can cite uniquely Christian principles, nor can anyone claim that the West is Christian cite any Christian principles that their Western government supports in law. If it is the purpose of all the world religions to protect patriarchy, i.e., the practice of marriage and family values, I'm just checking for the chapter. Chad can stop me anytime. If it is the purpose of all the world religions to protect patriarchy, that is, the practice of marriage and family values, then Christianity is clearly the weakest link. In fact, not only is Christianity the weakest link, it has already been subverted and replaced by liberalism, which has in turn rotted into intersectional feminism. It is this theology that is currently maintaining the matriarchy and morbidly dismantling all the institutions of patriarchy and in Western civilization, inverting social and moral hierarchies in its dementia and amnesia. The rising chaos and criminality of Western nations and its subverted institutions has made the least unfit to rule become national leaders. In the meantime, a helpless populace denuded of patriarchal values is reduced to a bawling infant sucking its thumb while waiting for its nappy to be changed by a nanny who has long since left the building. If Christianity is indeed a spent force, what should replace it? If it is to be replaced, what should replace it if not Islam? Can things be righted by more voting? Can it really not be seen that the more elections we have, the worse the government gets? Isn't it time to abandon liberal values, which are nothing more than ideas of the French revolutionaries reacting to the disastrous policies of the Ancien regime? It was operating under a corrupt Catholic Church that did nothing to improve the lot of the common Frenchman, and it was this that provoked the Third Estate to take matters into its own hands by ridding themselves of their monarch, supported by his First Estate, the Catholic priesthood. In any case, liberalism does not have scripture, unlike Judaism and Islam. This means that liberalism, whatever it has now become, has been hijacked by politicians claiming to represent liberalism, whose real gods are expediency and mendacity. Even if liberalism were a viable political ideology and not just a laundry list of three competing goals, such as liberty, equality, and fraternity, it too has been hopelessly subverted. If we are truly at liberty, would we want our brother to be our keeper? Would we treat him equally, even if he were obviously older or younger? Bearing in mind that competing secular political ideologies of fascism, Nazism, and communism have also failed, what are we left with? If socialism with Chinese characteristics is what communism has become in China in the early 21st century, what else might it become in China with more passing of time? If the world is spinning too quickly and we want to get off because we are suffering from dizziness, what is the best moral system available that we could all adopt in our different countries that would make the world revolve in a less alarming manner? If you were shopping around for a religion, you would be looking for one that worshipped the most powerful deity conceivable, with divine scripture that is least restrictive, promising you the most seductive paradise without making you guilty of the idolatry and blasphemy specifically and explicitly forbidden by God in His commandments. Since even Islamophobes cannot answer what would be a better guide to humanity, if not the Quran, we will have to assume that it is, in fact, the best available guide to humanity. What about the Torah? The Torah is for Jews, and in any case contains 36 capital offenses. Can you imagine what a Torah theocracy under rule by rabbi in Israel would be? It is easy to imagine a dystopian Israel riven by rabbinical rivalry, causing rabbis to periodically accuse each other of the 36 capital offenses to rid themselves of their rivals. In any case, the Torah is only for Jews who are less than 1% of the total global population. Their rules cannot be made the general rule for Gentiles. In any case, it is already clear that the Torah is now too hard for Jews to follow. Some lower but still acceptable standard of morality and religiosity must be set and upheld. Having dismissed the Torah for being the minimum moral standard for both Jews and Gentiles, we go on to consider the scripture of Christians. The New Testament is a scripture of idolaters who, as this being so, the scripture can be safely ignored. At its most authoritative, it is only the testimony of mortal and fallible men of dubious provenance claiming that they met Jesus. While the creation of Christianity has been attributed to Paul, it must be remembered that he never even met Jesus. If Gentiles want to worship the most powerful being conceivable, that would be the Abrahamic God who made two revelations to mankind, the Torah to Jews and the Quran to Gentiles. Since we already know that less than 1% of humanity are Jews, we must logically and necessarily opt for the Quran with its fewer and less restrictive rules of universal application. Jews could cooperate in raising moral standards all over the world by getting their rabbis to rank the four Gentile religions according to their conformity with the Noahide laws, making Islam the most and Christianity the least Noahide Gentile religion, leaving no room for doubt that Christianity must most displease God if he exists. If Islam is the most Noahide of all Gentile religions because it is Judaism light, then Buddhism must rank below it since it is an atheist religion superior to Hinduism, which is obviously idolatrous. However, even idolatrous Hinduism must still be better than Christianity because Christians cannot be more offensive to God even if they tried. Whatever you think of Hindus, they at least do not idolatrously worship a man convicted and crucified for blaspheming against the God of Israel, who is also Allah. Nor do they call the mother of this executed blasphemer mother of God, as the Catholic Church did. If Christianity is cursed by God because of its idolatry and blasphemy, then it can no longer be used. Even if God does not exist, the absurd beliefs Christians are required to affirm are nevertheless still offensive to reason. The sooner Westerner acknowledges the failure of Christianity, the sooner they can move over to Islam, more quickly solving their social, economic, and political problems by becoming a one-party theocracy. The sooner this happens, the shorter will be the period of chaos and criminality, although the West moves from matriarchy to theocracy, since only Quranic governance would restore the patriarchy and Western governments to good moral order. It does seem to be a rather long chapter. I apologize for that and for any offense caused. But I'll continue to read if Chad allows me. So I'll continue. So I will be defining matriarchy. Matriarchy is defined as a society prioritizing the preferences of unmarried parents who casually conceived and parented their illegitimate offspring, while patriarchy is a society prioritizing the preferences of married parents who want to properly parent their legitimate offspring. A caliph is a constitutional dictator without the right to bequeath his leadership position to his male offspring or male family members. It should be noted that Muslim empires who treated caliphs as kings or emperors with harems became extinct. To have a caliph as your national leader is to, in fact, declare your nation to be a republic. Let me put it this way. If China now were Muslim and the most powerful Islamic nation on earth, then Xi Jinping, being the current president of the People's Republic of China, would be the caliph. If America were now Muslim and also the most powerful Islamic nation on earth, then the president of the United States of America would be caliph. It is my contention that the American Republic was founded on Islamic principles rejecting monarchy. The position of the Torah on monarchy is inconsistent. The Torah says that when Jews enter the land of Israel, they shall appoint a king over themselves. Based on this, Maimonides writes that when Jews entered the land of Israel, they were commanded to do three things: appoint a king, destroy the Amalekites, and build a temple. Maimonides writes further that in the Messianic era, a Jewish king will arise and restore Jewish sovereignty, build a temple in Jerusalem, and ingather the exiles. In 1 Samuel, however, it says that Jews were condemned for requesting a king. This seems to be inconsistent. Since the age of monarchy has now come and gone, and there is no requirement or desire for either an absolute monarch or absolute dictator, only constitutional leaders are acceptable in any society enjoying the good order of stable and legitimate government. Christianity was always used to support the divine right of kings. While Christianity is not the only religion to support the divine right of kings, it must be borne in mind that any institution that relies on a clearly false foundational myth cannot endure. It cannot endure because the people who rely on it for support do not themselves believe in it and therefore do not follow its principles. If you claim to have a moral system which no one actually follows or enforces, then you do not enjoy the rule of law and, in fact, live in a society of rising chaos, corruption, and criminality. To discover that your society is a matriarchy is to discover that your society is dying of terminal cancer. Assuming that to correct such a situation is to restore the patriarchy, and restoring the patriarchy means to treat unmarried parents as sex offenders, as prescribed by chapter 24, verse 2 of the Quran, stating those convicted of fornication would be punished with 100 lashes, then we would have to adopt the divine rule book containing this rule if we wish to follow the best available guide to humanity. Those who do not agree that the best available guide to humanity is the Quran are, in my experience, Islamophobes. Interestingly, even Islamophobes cannot readily name a book they consider to be better than the Quran or higher in authority. If, as I recommend, Western nations become one-party theocracies, Western civilization as we know it will have ended. But of course, it would not be the end of the world in that there will still be civilization in the West. But using a different moral and legal political system, it would just be the end of Western civilization as we know it, ending the degenerate society that is Western civilization as we know it would be no bad thing if it is indeed a society incapable of achieving good government, whose ruling classes are atheists and nihilists and not in any way motivated by government and the national interest. The problem is therefore the problem of a ruling class that does not submit to truth, logic, and morality, acting on lies, nonsense, and policies damaging to the national interest. Such a state of affairs should be ended as soon as possible for the good of humanity, since the American global empire pumps out its moral sewage globally, destroying lives and nations, including its own. Any government that deliberately goes about destroying the marriageability of its citizens, as well as that of other nations, can only be described as embarking on a course of destruction. Therefore, were America to correct itself, the rest of the West, including Europe and Australasia, would do so too. Were this to happen, it is possible that Russia, with its Orthodox Christian identity, would also change together with India and China and even Israel, whose historic identity of being the birthplace of Judaism should entail its citizens live in a theocracy. If any country should be a theocracy, should it not be Israel? Currently, there are a number of theocracies in the world. The Vatican is technically a theocracy, and the remainder in Afghanistan, Iran, Mauritania, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and Yemen. If Islam is Judaism light, then Jews should not have a problem living under Sharia. While I am aware approximately half of Jewry in Israel are secular Jews wanting to live in Israel as liberal Democrats, it must be pointed out that I am only writing this book on the premise that liberal democracy has failed. If Islam is Judaism light, then secular Koranism is Islam light. Secular Koranism does not require anyone to change their religion. Using secular Koranism would get round the problem of so many divisions in society, preventing it from dealing effectively with its internal and external enemies. In a matriarchy of atheists and nihilists, men fear women and loss of sexual access to women, which would mean loss of status. In a matriarchy where sex is supposedly cheap, not having sexual access to women means a catastrophic lowering of status, preventing the siring of progeny. Because men fear this prospect, they will submit to the feminine preference, whatever it is, even as they know that the feminine preference is morally and intellectually corrupting. Men are so intimidated by this fear of alienating women and cutting their sexual access that they no longer dare to make arguments in favor of patriarchy. They are already conscious that making these arguments would only alienate and outrage women, who will denounce them to the authorities, with the consequence that their status will be catastrophically lowered through being labeled sexist, misogynist, extremist, terrorist, etc. If atheists are just people worshipping their own dumb opinions while rejecting truth, logic, and morality, it would not be too far fetched to say that our ruling classes might as well all be suffering from a learning disability or a mental health issue, making them unable to think rationally or accept rational arguments, as well as suffering from a host of character defects that they will deny having. Both men and women suffer from the delusion that it is their human right to indulge in fornication. Senior men in politics routinely pander to immoral women. For example, leaders of political parties who pander to the female voter because they know that female voters, being the most volatile group amongst the electorate, need to be won over for an election to be won. For this reason, secular Koranism, which would only successfully operate in a one-party theocracy, is the solution most men dare not discuss, morally and intellectually crippled by their fear of alienating the immoral women, now the overwhelming majority of female voters. How do we know if a woman is immoral without taking into account her past sexual history? Last page now. We know she's immoral without even knowing anything about her sexual history if she refuses to acknowledge that children would be better off brought up by their two married biological parents living together in a loving relationship, and refuses to support laws privileging married parents over non-parents and treating unmarried parents as sex offenders. Men who refuse to acknowledge this must also be regarded as unmarriageable. If such men are currently married, they must be regarded as either suffering from a learning disability, neurosis, or character defect, directly or indirectly responsible for bad government. The governed complain that their government is bad, and their government cannot give the governed the impression that they are well governed, even when the full apparatus of state, which includes the media, the judiciary, the government, and government departments, you would have thought they would control the narrative, but they do not, because they suffer from the problem of not being believed, like the boy who cried wolf once too often. Secular Koranism is an easy to understand idea with an easy to understand narrative that would take the Western world by storm once enough social conservatives understand its potential and pragmatism. And that's the end of chapter 2. And I'm sure you've all had enough. Chad is making motions of me continuing. I'll have a drink of water before I carry on. Oh, that's a third of the book now, really. Chapter 3. What are the options? Christian nationalism. Carry on voting. Blame the Jews. Blame the Muslims. Blame the American Empire. Blame the failure of Christianity in the West. Blame feminism. Establish a one-party theocracy governed by the principles of secular Koranism. Christian nationalism. There has been much talk amongst the dissident right about Christian nationalism, with the implication that its adoption is an option. This is because those who think Christian nationalism is an option do not seem to acknowledge that the West was built on Christian imperialism. There are 3 global Christian empires: the Spanish, the British, and American empires. Those unable to see that Christian nationalism has come and gone, or forgotten that they were given the T-shirt by their ancestors, are clearly lacking in historical knowledge and self-awareness. Christianity of all Gentile religions is the one most stretching credulity with the Trinity, requiring Christians to believe that Jesus is the co-equal of the God of Israel, who is also Allah, which Jews and Muslims regard as idolatry and blasphemy. Since most Westerners are functionally atheists, expecting Westerners to believe in God would be a great undertaking. If Westerners already doubt the existence of God, expecting them to go the whole extra light year of believing that Jesus also created the universe is over-optimistic. It also betrays ignorance of Christian history, implying that they are naive enough to think that when the bargain of Christian missionaries from Rome was accepted by the barbarian kings of Europe, that their subjects were asked nicely if they fancied trying a bit of Christianity to see how they liked it before having some more. In a world in which human sacrifice was routinely practiced, we would be naive in the extreme to imagine that the subjects of an absolute monarch would have been consulted properly or at all. Under the principle of cuius regio, eius religio, whose realm his religion, meaning you have to follow the religion of your king, or else. Under this principle, it was generally accepted that whatever was the religion of the absolute monarch, that too would be the religion of his subjects, whether they liked it or not. It is really extremely unlikely that the peasants would be consulted about their new national religion before the offer of the Christian missionaries was accepted by the first Christian king of any European country in pre-Christian Europe. We know, therefore, the practice of heretic burning, the burning of any subject who questioned the divinity of Jesus, was common to Christian Europe. We also know that within a century after the practice of executing heretics was given up from 1697, the Americans rejected monarchy in order to reject its religion of Christianity. So no, the return of Christian nationalism for those on the dissident right who enjoy imagining themselves as Knights Templars, set slaying Jews and Saracens in the Levant, is not really an option unless we want to return to an age of extreme religious persecution practiced by Christians on each other and non-Christians. There is no need to make Westerners believe in the absurdity that Jesus is the co-equal of the supreme and eternal Abrahamic God who created the universe, or make them believe that Mary is his mother. A morally satisfying and coherent narrative taking into account what God, if he exists, might be pleased with would do the job. If the Abrahamic God who created the universe and has communicated twice with humanity through the Torah and Quran exists, one can imagine that he would be pleased if his creation properly divined his wishes and followed them, particularly if doing so would be in their own interests. If you had no choice but to follow one of the two books from the same supreme source, why wouldn't you follow the one with fewer restrictions that does not have 36 capital offences? Carry on voting. That's one of the options. And carry on and carry on having your election stolen. Next, blame Jews. That's already been tried many times in history. Blame Muslims. Why blame the people whose religion you will soon be adopting? Blame the American Empire. The Third Christian Empire will be useful in spreading Islam because nature abhors a vacuum and will soon fill it. Christianity is, of course, a moral vacuum which will soon be filled by Sharia. Blame the failure of Christianity in the West. Blame the failure of Christianity for the supremacy of feminism and matriarchy. Blame feminism. Blame feminism for tolerating widespread illegitimacy, which has now turned the West into a degenerate matriarchy. If the problem is matriarchy, then patriarchy must be the solution. If patriarchy is a solution, then theocracy must be the vehicle. If theocracy is a vehicle, then establish a one-party theocracy governed by the principles of secular Koranism, as interpreted by a legally trained former feminist and former liberal who is not a Muslim but understands the West, its history, and who takes a committed interest in the welfare of Westerners who are members of her family and friendship circle. And finally, establish a one-party state governed by the principles of secular Koranism. This is the one I recommend and have a personal interest in. See, I've nearly... We're halfway through now. Oh, Chad wants me to continue. Chapter 4. Why something must be done. Let us assume there are three options. 1. The status quo. 2. Secular Koranism. 3. The overturning of the status quo through revolutionary means, replacing the current moral system with something that is not secular Koranism. What are the options of secular ideologies that are rivals to secular Koranism? There is Yoram Hazoni's national conservatism. He wrote The Virtue of Nationalism with the intention of promoting social conservatism as a means of promoting government in the national interest. Unfortunately for him, his advices only provoked hostility and accusations of heresy in America, and his book has now been forgotten about. This is because he failed to grasp the nettle of the failed religion and political system of the West, representative democracy operating under Christo-liberalism. Neither Christianity nor liberalism has anything resembling an official handbook that is actually followed, nor has any convincing public intellectuals prepared to defend. I read it wrong. Neither Christianity nor liberalism has anything resembling an official handbook that is actually followed, nor any convincing public intellectuals. Nor are there any convincing public intellectuals prepared to defend the current orthodoxy against its detractors. That's why liberals don't tend to want to debate people who are anti-liberal, because they they can't really defend their absurd beliefs. Because really, liberalism is, I'm just talking now. What is liberalism anyway? It is basically a kind of idea that liberalism is a good in itself, that everybody wants liberty, right? And I guess for a while, when things were very oppressive under your absolute monarchy, it's not surprising that you would want liberation from your absolute monarch. But if you take it to the other extreme, it means living in the law of the jungle, where your stronger neighbor will have a right to kill you and take your stuff, and what is Chad doing? He's scrolling. Does he want to talk now? Make a comment, perhaps? Or does he want me to continue talking? I'll go on if he wants.
Hello and welcome to the Friday Morning Nameless. Today I would like to present a series of simplified propositions to put into practice. Presumably my perception is that some of us have painstakingly operated on principles of prejudice. This is problematic. Please, proceed and practice these procedural practices to gain a much-needed new perspective through participation. 1. Find a partner to express accountability with. 2. Pray to whatever God will listen. 3. Find yourself in the characters of literature, preferably spiritual literature, hence probably all literature. 4. Identify yourself in the opposition. 5. Offer your inadequacies to the God that will listen, seek guidance in such matters. 6. Be merciful. 7. Be gracious. 8. Self-sacrifice is a must, as well as 6 and 7. 9. You are not God. 10. You are an agent for God, like it or not. 11. Repeat 1 through 11. Lastly, consider this. If you stare into the abyss, consider what the abyss considers the abyss. Who does the king bend the knee to? Thank you very much, and remember, this little corner of the internet does not exist.
Okay. He wants me to continue. So I'm talking about Yoram Hazony. The fact that Yoram Hazony is still talking about conservatism as if it were not to spend force betrays a lack of understanding of the reality of conservatism. Conservatism is meaningless without social conservatism. Social conservatism is meaningless without forbidding and punishing extramarital sex. The most egregious and blatant of which is being the unmarried parents of illegitimate offspring. Fornication is clearly forbidden in chapter 24, verse 2 of the Quran, prescribing corporal punishment for unmarried parents who are ipso facto guilty of fornication. It cannot be denied that if you are an unmarried parent, you must have been guilty of fornication. The defense of a virgin birth has already been used once by Christianity and cannot be used again. Question: is conservatism possible without Christianity? I would say not, since it is a failure of Christianity that has rendered conservatism isolated. By itself, without the support of religion and God, conservatism is only the belief system of party poopers despised by liberals. Not even those who identify as Christian take Christianity seriously because they are overwhelmingly cultural Christians. Being cultural Christians, they would not be aware that they are required to believe that Jesus is God, as the Trinity requires them to be. As the Trinity requires to be properly Christian in order to achieve salvation. Without belief in God and the desire to please Him, it is impossible for Westerners to summon the conviction and political will necessary to defend the institutions of marriage and family. The fact is that Christianity is despised by the overwhelming majority of Westerners and regarded as a religion of the stupid people. Its leaders are pitied and held in hatred, ridicule, and contempt, infamous for their hypocrisy, cowardice, and submission to the quasi-state religion of liberalism. In the early 21st century, liberalism just means sexual liberation from the rules of marriage and good parenting. Tolerance of fornication since the swinging 60s has led to tolerance of illegitimacy. Tolerance of illegitimacy has led eventually to tolerance of widespread illegitimacy, establishing a matriarchy suffering from the moral disease of illegitimacy. It is a fact generally accepted that convicted prisoners are mostly from fatherless homes brought up by their unmarried mothers who have deprived their illegitimate offspring of a father. They are the agents of chaos and criminality which any healthy patriarchy confident in its beliefs and existence would have no trouble acknowledging. However, since we live in a matriarchy, it is those who are married parents who are in the minority. In the 21st century, with rising illegitimacy and a culture of casual sex, it cannot be doubted that most of the sex that takes place in the West is not marital sex between husband and a wife. We already know that the US suffers an illegitimacy rate as high as 40%, according to figures released in 2017. If patriarchy is a society prioritizing the preferences of married parents wanting to properly parent their legitimate offspring, then matriarchy is a society prioritizing the preferences of unmarried parents who casually conceived and parented their illegitimate offspring. The perfect patriarchy equals 100% married parents. The perfect matriarchy equals 100% unmarried parents. Under indiscriminate universal suffrage, no democratic politician would dare to risk alienating its voters who are A. illegitimate offspring, B. unmarried mothers, C. unmarried fathers. For this reason, more elections under representative democracy would not work to restore the patriarchy. Since illegitimacy is very high in the West, currently 40% in the US, 50% in Canada, and 51% in the UK, any hope of solving the problem with more elections should be firmly dismissed and extinguished. The following is an extract from Keith Joseph's Edgbaston speech in Birmingham on 19th October 1974. In case you don't know who Keith Joseph is, well, he was actually Sir Keith Joseph, and he was a baronet, and he was Jewish. And for a while, they thought that he was going to be the next British Prime Minister until he made this fateful speech called his Edgbaston speech in Birmingham. So let me read out his shocking speech that destroyed his career. He said, "The balance of our population, our human stock, is threatened. A recent article in Poverty published by the Child Poverty Action Group showed that a high and rising proportion of children are being born to mothers least fitted to bring children into the world and bring them up. They are born to mothers who were first pregnant in adolescence in social classes 4 and 5. Those are low social classes. Many of these girls are unmarried. Many are deserted or divorced or soon will be. Some are of low intelligence, most of low educational attainment. They are unlikely to be able to give children the stable emotional background, the consistent combination of love and firmness which are more important than riches. They are producing problem children, the future unmarried mothers, delinquents, denizens of our bostels, subnormal educational establishments, prisons, hostels for drifters. Yet these mothers, The under-20s, in many cases, single parents from classes 4 and 5, are now producing a third of all births. This is 1974. A high proportion of these births are a tragedy for the mother, the child, and for us. Yet what shall we do? If we do nothing, the nation moves towards degeneration. However much resources we pour into preventative work and the overburdened educational system, it is all the more serious when we think of the loss of people with talent and initiative through emigration, as our semi-socialism deprives them of adequate opportunities, rewards, and satisfactions. Yet proposals to extend birth control facilities to these classes of people, particularly young unmarried girls, the potential young unmarried mothers, evokes entirely understandable moral opposition. Is it not condoning immorality? I suppose it is. But which is the lesser evil? Until we are able to remoralize whole groups and classes of people, undoing the harm done when already weak, restraints on strong instincts are further weakened by permissiveness in television and films on bookstalls. Nearly half a century later, the West is now divided, degenerate, in decline, and suffering from dementia, with Western governments making it a policy to encourage euthanasia, suicide, unmarried parenthood, divorce, gay marriage, and transgenderism. It is almost as if Western governments are warehousing Westerners for extinction. It seems our political pastors would prefer not to be put through the trouble of having to govern us, our children, grandchildren, or descendants, and are now planning to replace us with migrant labor and AI. Either the problem of degeneracy, that of each subsequent generation becoming lower in status, ability, morality, and marriageability than the previous one, is a problem, or it is not. Either it is reversible by changing the law, or it is not. Either it is possible to challenge and defeat matriarchy, or it is not. Either there exists the political will and organization to challenge and defeat it, or there is not. Either the attempt is made, or it is not. Either the attempt succeeds, or it does not. Should the attempt be made? A conclusive sign of degeneracy is when the percentage of married parents goes down and the percentage of unmarried parents and illegitimate offspring goes up. Marriage, intended to facilitate the transmission of the eugenic heritable trait of marriageability. Let me start again. Marriage, intended to facilitate the transmission of the eugenic heritable trait of marriageability, is also a child protection scheme. If a child is unfortunate enough to have one abusive parent, it is hoped that its other parent would protect it from the other. However, if the child is already fatherless and its unmarried mother is abusive, it will have no protector other than social services when its abuse will have been so long-standing as to have come to the notice of its neighbors and its teachers at school. The less marriageable the men and women are of your society, the more dysgenic it is, producing illegitimate offspring who will themselves go on to produce illegitimate offspring who will mostly constitute the next generation of criminals and underachievers. The more marriageable the men and women are of your society, the more eugenic it is, producing legitimate children who are in turn capable of themselves producing legitimate offspring, more likely to become desirable employees as well as be a credit to their parents. Western governments now indoctrinate primary school children that being gay and transgender is an acceptable lifestyle option. Since being gay and transgender by definition makes us unmarriageable in the traditional sense of the word, if you accept that the purpose of marriage is legitimate children, it is clear that the government is actively and deliberately making its citizens unmarriageable. We do not know if this is intentional and deliberate or merely the natural consequence of being a matriarchy. It is only to be expected that any society would try to perpetuate itself. If you are a patriarchy, all things being equal, you would practice patriarchy in order to perpetuate your society. Ditto a matriarchy. Each will have its own vested interests and represent the natural inertia of any society that does not wish to change its ways. A sexually liberated society would wish to perpetuate sexual liberation, while a patriarchy would predictably wish to perpetuate moral restraint. Should an attempt be made to challenge and defeat the matriarchy with the objective of replacing it with a restored patriarchy? If it is true that these things are sent to try us, then we should rise to the challenge. In fact, both principled atheists who want children and descendants who are a credit to them would be doing it for the principle of the thing. They would challenge the system because they believe it is the right thing to do, even if they are not sure they will succeed. If most people, irrespective of their belief in God, challenged the matriarchy, then they would be more likely to succeed than if most people declined to do so. It is just a matter of generating enough of a collective desire to challenge the system so that enough people are prepared to do what is necessary. To be able to generate the requisite engagement and interest in those capable of challenging and defeating the matriarchy, enough honourable and influential people must be convinced that the challenge is worth taking because success is probable. One must be mindful of how Moses would not have succeeded in persuading any of the Hebrews to come out of Egypt with him if he had told them there would be 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, after which he, as their leader, would not live to enter the promised land. However, it is not acceptable to make fraudulent misrepresentations about the probability of success. On the one hand, making it sound too easy would suggest that one has not quite understood the gravity of the situation. On the other hand, making it sound too arduous would only demoralize people into apathy and indifference. The level of difficulty must be just enough to seem achievable, but not too arduous as to make it a fool's errand. To say that it is enough to carry on voting would only arouse indifference and apathy, since most Westerners already know that elections do not change anything, and if they did, they would be banned or stolen. Proposing to slay an entire herd of sacred cows would not be received well either by the political establishment or those whom they presume to govern. The sacred cows are 1. Representative democracy, 2. Feminism, and 3. Sexual liberation from the rules of marriage and good parenting. Just one more page. Expecting to solve our social and political problems through more voting would be the equivalent of a thirsty man drinking seawater. Not only would the problem remain unaddressed, they would in fact worsen. It is already well known that all political parties capable of being voted into office rely on the female vote, and the way to capture the female vote is to offer female voters state benefits or legislative protection from their own stupidity and irresponsibility at the expense of men and taxpayers. But how does one go about restoring the patriarchy and social conservatism with Quranic principles of governance in a one-party theocracy after proposing to slay the sacred cows of the West? One must first propose it, but wouldn't it be rejected out of hand and dismissed with an accusation of extremism or insanity? It is only extremism if what is being proposed is more than is necessary to solve the problem. It is only insanity if one's conclusions are not based on sound logic. The argument is only sound when the facts being relied on are not in dispute. What wouldn't work is if we minced our words, beat about the bush as Yoram Hassoni has done, while omitting to state clearly what needs to be said in the clearest, briefest, and most memorable terms. So I finished chapter 4. And I'm going to have another drink of water. It's nearly finished. Well, I would talk to the chat if it said anything more. So Chad, what do you want me to do? How many chapters are there? Chapter 6. Yeah, it's chapter 6 and conclusion. Yes, Chad wants to talk to other people. I tend to agree.
I think that you should just continue doing what you're doing. We're going to take a little short music break, though.
Okay. I'll keep reading until somebody comes in. Chapter 5. Asking questions. If the problem is matriarchy, the solution must be patriarchy. If the destination is patriarchy, the vehicle must be theocracy. If matriarchy is a
just king, great king. People error, people king, big, just king, king. Happy, many down, many jack king from right. Just new king, big, great can new, happy. Are not what they seem, the hours. People very just king, great king. People error, people king, big just king, king. Happy, many down, many jack king from right. Just new king, big, great can new, happy. The owls are not what they seem. The owls are not what they seem. The owls, very just king, great king. People error, people king, big, just king, king. King, happy, many down, many jack, king from right. Just new king, big, great can new, happy. Owls are not what they seem, the owls.
All right, that one's a little self-indulgent.
Okay, chapter 5. Asking questions. If the problem is matriarchy, the solution must be patriarchy. If the destination is patriarchy, the vehicle must be theocracy. If matriarchy is a society prioritizing the preferences of unmarried parents who casually conceived and parented their illegitimate offspring, then patriarchy is a society of married parents who want to properly parent their legitimate offspring. If theocracy is a society governed by God's laws and God forbids extramarital sex, then obeying God's laws would have the effect of restoring the patriarchy and keeping matriarchy at bay through the criminalizing of unmarried parents and treating them as sex offenders with chapter 24, verse 2 of the Quran. The 100 lashes thing.
Didn't you already read that like 3 times?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Pretty sure you read that 3 times now.
Yeah, I kind of have to repeat myself, but okay, that bit's okay. The moral
it's okay.
order-
I just was wondering if like you, or is that like
Yeah,
how
I'm
you do
reading
it
it
in the
again.
book itself? Okay.
Okay,
Well, continue. Yes, continue.
thank you. The moral order of patriarchy would be married parents being the most privileged group, followed by non-parents, with sex offenders predictably with a lower status. Sex offenders would be those who have been convicted of having sex with those not their spouse, evidenced by illegitimate offspring. A spouse under the proposed new regime would be defined as a member of the opposite sex, not within the forbidden degrees of consanguinity. Gay marriage and civil partnerships would be abolished. Same-sex couples would still have the option of bequeathing property to each other because inheritance tax will be abolished for all. They would also have the option of giving each other power of attorney in a housewarming ceremony at which their lawyer could be a guest. If it can be agreed that marriage is for legitimate children, it becomes clear that marriage is a eugenic practice intended to filter the next generation through only permitting those who are capable of finding someone of the opposite sex prepared to enter into a long-term relationship for the purpose of parenting legitimate offspring, prepared to suffer a social and economic penalty if the marriage fails. If it is accepted that the social and political problems of the West is caused by the desecration of the institution of marriage, then the solution must be to reconsecrate it through prescribing a penalty for those who break the marriage contract. Since the culture is matriarchy, and by that is meant a society prioritizing the preferences of unmarried parents who casually conceived and parented their illegitimate offspring, as well as a political system run on the basis of indiscriminate universal suffrage, we cannot expect the problem of widespread illegitimacy to be solved under representative democracy. Since illegitimacy involves a trinity of sin, its product, as well as its parents, and the percentage of illegitimacy was already 40% when this figure was first released in 2017. It cannot be expected that any democratic politician proposing any effective discouragement would encounter anything but resistance by vested interests consisting of groups fearing loss of status. Most members of society suffering from this moral and social disease would regularly encounter in their social circles a bastard, an unmarried father, or an unmarried mother. Illegitimacy is now so widespread that the Western political classes no longer think anything of national leaders such as the Prime Minister of Britain, Boris Johnson, and New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, being unmarried parents while in office. Nothing short of national repentance induced by a public information campaign with the cooperation of the media would change hearts and minds. Since we cannot expect any member of the liberal political establishment to be morally courageous enough to be associated with the slaying of a sacred cow that began growing in the swinging 60s to the monstrous size it has now become, it must be done through social media platforms using the principle of freedom of expression justified by growing concern about a growing social problem once the chaos and criminality of matriarchy can no longer be ignored or tolerated. Questions rather than statements should be used, since questions are an invitation to engage, while statements, even if disagreed with, are more easily ignored. So I have a list of questions, such as, do you know most convicted prisoners come from fatherless homes casually parented by their unmarried mothers on welfare? If God exists, did he create a universe in which the sin is its own punishment? Are atheist people who wouldn't notice it even if they were being punished by God? Do you sometimes feel that you and your society are being collectively punished for unspecified sins? Now, that neatly links us to these discussions with Chris and Luke about the meaning of suffering. Even if you don't believe in God, does sin exist? Is sin just something we already know we shouldn't do, even if we don't believe in God, because it is provably bad for us? Do you think Jews are the world's most ancient and powerful tribe because their religion suggests they have divine protection? If both Christianity and Islam are derived from Judaism, is not Islam a synthesis of Judaism and Christianity? If Islam is a synthesis of Judaism and Christianity, does this mean it is a divine synthesis of both, with bad bits taken out and the good bits left in? Are the bad bits of Judaism for Jews its great number of restrictions and religious obligations and the smallness of their number? Are the bad bits of Christianity for Christians its idolatry and its lack of divine revelation containing the laws of God for Gentiles? Are the good bits about Christianity its universality, including all of humanity? Are the good bits of Judaism Jews having the most powerful deity conceivable and its divine revelation containing the laws of God? Are religious groups the biggest group we can hope to join to assert our supranational and individual moral identity? Do we owe it to ourselves to choose the best religion around if we had to choose a religion for our country whose rules are most likely to result in government in the national interest? If nationalism is government in the national interest, how is it in the national interest to undermine the institution of marriage? If marriage is eugenic and illegitimacy dysgenic, isn't patriarchy obviously in the national interest and matriarchy obviously against the national interest? Is nationalism possible without social conservatism? Is social conservatism possible without forbidding and punishing extramarital sex? Is Christianity kaput because no one in government can even say what Christian principles are, let alone tell you which ones, if any, are supported by government? Are you aware that Christians idolatrously worship a man crucified for blasphemy? Don't Christians know that it is idolatry to worship anything that isn't God? Isn't it idolatry to worship a man? What is the authority for the proposition that Jesus is God? If the authority for the proposition that Jesus is God is Athanasius, who was responsible for the Athanasian Creed, where did he get the idea from? Why was Arianism finally abandoned in favor of Trinitarianism after its adoption by two Roman emperors? Wouldn't Constantine have would Constantine have adopted Christianity if Islam had been an option? If Christianity is idolatry and blasphemy, wouldn't Christians be cursed by God if he exists? If God forbade idolatry and blasphemy in his commandments, shouldn't idolaters and blasphemers who have been practicing the idolatry and blasphemy of Christianity under 62 Christian monarchs fear and expect divine punishment? I'm talking about the 62 monarchs of England. Next question. I'm afraid there are quite a few, but the list is nearly gone now. Finished now. Are the Noahide laws fair enough? Is the Quran the best available guide to humanity? If not, what is? Do we live in a logical universe created by a logical and benevolent deity who can be understood through his laws for humanity, designed to protect us from ourselves and each other? Is the First Amendment based on chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran? Does Judaism define Jewish identity even if most Jews are not observant Jews? Is marriage the rearing of the next generation in optimum conditions, i.e., two married biological parents living together in a loving relationship? Is tolerating unmarried parents dysgenic? Are the consequences of widespread illegitimacy degeneracy? Isn't degeneracy against the national interest? Wouldn't it be in the national interest to tackle the root cause of degeneracy? Isn't the root cause of degeneracy the culture of casual sex? Do you know that there are only two communications from the Abrahamic God to humanity? The one that has 36 capital offenses actually omitted to mention fornication. And this, of course, means the Quran is a better one. Just two more questions. Is degeneracy the increasing tolerance of ever-lowering standards of education and behavior, as well as increasing chaos and criminality unaddressed by the government? Finally, should unmarried parents be treated as sex offenders to discourage illegitimacy? I like to think this should be enough to begin a national conversation, if not an international debate, about the role of religion in society. If spirituality is the desire for justice in this life and the next, then most of us have this spiritual need, currently unaddressed by the materialistic ideologies of capitalism and communism. There is nothing inherently virtuous about being born rich or poor, working class or middle class. Good sense would tell us we have to make the most of our advantages and try to avoid doing the wrong thing. Good sense would also tell us that there is a right and wrong way of doing things. We are more likely to do the right thing if we are fools believing in lies than wise people guided by truth, logic, and morality. If these questions were asked and answered correctly, it would not be too long before the inescapable conclusion is reached: unprincipled Christianity has rotted into matriarchy and must be replaced by Quranic principles of governance if we are to be restored to good moral order. As for good moral order, I like to think we can all agree that this exists when most people think the laws are fair enough and the right people are in charge. Chapter 6. How it is to be done. Government in the national interest is the least we can expect of good government. If we do not enjoy good government, what is the reason for this? If people deserve the government they get, and we are people who do not deserve good government, can't we make ourselves worthy? How would we go about doing so? If we are in error, we should correct ourselves. Before we can correct ourselves, we must acknowledge error. When we acknowledge error, we will repent, and repentance is the first step towards cessation before we resolve not to repeat the error. A sign must be given that we have repented. What better way to repent of the error of Christianity and the failed secular political ideologies adopted after its failure than to adopt Quranic principles of governance? If we already have a global empire, it would be easy to roll out Quranic principles of governance throughout the empire through the media outlets, thereby changing hearts and minds, the law, and eventually the culture. At the very least, an attempt along those lines must be made for the sake of our tribe, nation, society, and civilization. Social media is at our fingertips to reach out to friends and family, allies and associates, as well as opponents with whom to engage in rational debate. Below are proposals to phase in Quranic principles of governance in the American Republic. 1. The justices of the U.S. Supreme Court to read the Quran and identifying the commandments of Allah capable of being turned into legislation, listing and numbering them. 2. Incorporating the farewell speech of George Washington and its advice into the U.S. Constitution. 3. Congress to repeal existing U.S. legislation identified as going against these principles. 4. The executive to cease any practices identified as in conflict with Quranic principles. A similar exercise would be undertaken by any country that has taken the decision to adopt Quranic principles of governance. The presumption is that the First Amendment is based on chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran, which states, "There is no compulsion in belief, truth stands clear from error." There is a White House Quran that belonged to Thomas Jefferson, who drafted the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom that later became the First Amendment. 5 of the Founding Fathers rejected the Trinity or stated their support for religious freedom, allowing Americans to deny the Trinity and still be eligible for public office. In Britain, the practice of executing blasphemers only ended in 1697 when 20-year-old Thomas A.
No, well, we don't do that.
Edward Whiteman was the last man in England to be burned at the stake for heresy for denying the Trinity in 1612. A Gentile believing in the Abrahamic God while denying the divinity of Jesus is closer to being Muslim than Christian. Washington's farewell speech has many references to morality and foreign policy, which has Quranic echoes. 31:17 of the Quran exhorts Muslims to enjoin good and forbid evil and iniquity. George Washington said, "Observe good faith and justice towards all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. Religion and morality enjoin this conduct." Which religion could Washington have meant? Jesus did not get round to saying anything about foreign policy and international relations in the New Testament before he was executed for blasphemy. What does the Jefferson Bible say? Jefferson excised anything that was not in the reported speech of Jesus from his Bible. This means the Pauline epistles of the New Testament were excluded. Paul never met Jesus, though he claimed to have seen him in a vision on the road to Damascus. Whatever the Old Testament said about warfare, it would be too specific to Jews. Excuse me, I'm going to mute myself and cough. Whatever the Old Testament said about warfare It would be too specific to Jews to be safely adopted by Gentiles, since it requires the genocidal extermination of Amalekites, whose existence has divided rabbinical opinion. Have Amalek become extinct, and if not, how can they be identified? I have proposed that the only way of identifying them is through their moral system, which they must have if they are still to exist.
Are you sick and tired of being asked about the TLC? When you look at this corner, do you not even think that it's a thing? Well, if you're like me, raise your hand. Because I got what you need. You need Telos tea.
And now, this program is brought to you by...
Last TV on here. Why would we need a TV? A darn TV. Why on earth would you put a TV in here? A darn TV. Why on earth would you put a TV in here? Why would we need a TV? A darn TV. A darn TV. A darn TV. Why on earth would you put a TV in here? Last TV on here. Why would we need a TV? Why on earth? Why on earth? A darn TV. Why on earth would you put a TV in here?
Okay, I'll continue now.
Okay. After this, can I ask you some questions? Will I be able to ask you some questions? Okay. Go ahead and read a little more.
Yes,
I want to ask you
please
something.
do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you want me to read now? Oh, okay. I thought you said you wanted to ask me some questions. Okay. Now, where was I? Whatever the Old Testament said about warfare, it would be too specific to Jews to be safely adopted by Gentiles, since the Old Testament requires the genocidal extermination of the Amalekites, whose existence has divided rabbinical opinion. Have Amalek become extinct, and if not, how can they be identified? I have proposed that the only way of identifying them through their moral is through their moral system, which they must have if they are still to exist. The moral system of Amalek, if they still exist, would be the one that most offends against the Noahide laws, and the religion that most offends against them would be Christianity. Thankfully, the Founding Fathers had the wisdom to quarantine the church from their state. Since there are hardly any confirmed Christians these days, there need not be undue alarm amongst Christians. It would be the easiest thing for those who are confirmed Christians to renounce their belief in the Trinity, for which there will be a formal procedure as well as a registry of former Trinitarians, While nothing would happen to those who refuse to put their name on the register, those who register would raise their Quranic credit score. The Jefferson Bible simply demonstrates the thinness of the material attributed to Jesus as reported by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If the distillation of Christian wisdom is the Sermon on the Mount, then there is really not much that could have guided any government about Christian legislation in the New Testament. Therefore, the only scripture Washington could have meant was the Quran, which does state a policy of defensive wars only, while also allowing for successful imperial wars in which the jizya, a conditional tribute, is exacted by the conquered country. Is exacted if the conquered country chooses not to adopt Islam. America is a republic that considers itself to be a Christian nation. However, Christianity was only ever used to support the divine right of kings. Even in these narrow terms, it has failed, since the adoption of Christianity by Constantine did not prevent the fall of Rome. Charles I lost his head in the English Revolution in 1649. Louis XVI was beheaded in the French Revolution in 1789, and Nicholas II was yet another victim of regicide in 1917. Even China gave up its monarchy over a century ago. In 1911, it is now time for both the Orient and the Occident to acknowledge that the age of monarchy is now well and truly over. The purpose of a king was to lead his army into war. Since warfare stopped being conducted in this way centuries ago, and no one is proposing its reintroduction, it can be seen that monarchy is one extra layer of the political classes that we can easily do without. Were the monarchy to be abolished, Charles III would still have a job as the head of the Church of England and be his own Archbishop of Canterbury, should he choose to exercise that option. If he is capable, he can mount a defense of the Trinity, or else abdicate and leave it to William. When William V, in his turn, fails to explain how the Trinity is not idolatry and blasphemy, and how Jesus is God, the throne will pass to his children. Prince George of Wales, born 2013, and then to Princess Charlotte of Wales, born 2015, and then Prince Louis of Wales, born 2018, who cannot be expected to defend it, whereupon the parcel will be passed to its brother, Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, born 1984, and then to his brother's children, Archie Mountbatten Windsor, born 2019, Lilibet Mountbatten Windsor, born 2021. If and when they get to his uncle, the disgraced Andrew, the monarchists will finally give up, if they have not done so before. Under the scenario, the line to the royal succession will seem like an undignified queue at a public convenience, and in this way end, making way for more rational and better government under an Islamic republic. Britain's dominions of Australia, Canada, and New Zealand is what remains of the British Empire. If Australians, Canadians, and New Zealanders have a referendum on whether to remain a monarchy or declare themselves independent republics with an independent foreign policy, it is expected that they will be considering their unique geopolitical interests rather than being impressed by the running soap opera that is The Crown, a Netflix dramatization of the British royal family enjoyed the world over because of its sumptuous production values. It is obvious that no one's male relations can be a sufficiently big pool of political talent from which to choose the next leader of their nation. However, a one-party state would allow the government to attract the best political talent in the country, who will join the only political party allowed to operate in the land. Is not the increasing nervousness and belligerence of America really a dawning awareness that China is more rationally governed than the American Republic and doing better? Presumably, that is why it is now falling into its Thucydides trap as it bangs hysterically on its battle drums. The Thucydides trap is a trap Britain fell into twice in its desperate bid to prevent the rise of Germany as a dominant European land power, causing it to start 2 world wars and consequently lose its empire. The Thucydides trap, or is a term popularized by American political scientist Graham T. Allison to describe an apparent tendency towards war when an emerging power threatens to displace an existing great power as a regional or international hegemon. Since World War III would be undeniably be bad for business as well as the reputations of Western survivors after a nuclear holocaust, it is to be hoped that it can be prevented. A representative democracy where the next national leader is announced after an election is a rather less orderly transition of power than China. If Xi Jinping, currently the president of China, were to fall under a bus, a new leader would be presented by the Politburo Standing Committee within 24 hours, probably using the papal conclave rules. In the American Republic, the vice president is only a heartbeat away from being president, since he or she, in the case of Kamala Harris, not a popular woman, inherits a position of the president the moment it falls vacant. While it is the role of the vice president to take over should a sitting president become incapacitated or die in office, they are really only chosen for the purpose of impressing the voting public rather than for the purpose of assuming power. As for the British, nobody much cares which member of its political establishment currently has a seat in the musical chairs that is a game they play in the Here Today and Gone Tomorrow series of British prime ministers. It is probable that if they cease to have general elections before choosing a prime minister, nobody would much care or notice once they realised that the annoyance and tedium of having general elections would finally end. World War I should be called the War of the Cancelled Election. It was over a cancelled election in 1915 that the British declared war on Germany in World War I. If World War II was a continuation of World War I, then World War I was about a cancelled election the Liberals expected to win if the summer war that began in 1914 was a short, successful one. There was a general belief at the time soldiers sent to war would be home by Christmas. The enormity of the realization by the British that they lost their world empire because of one cancelled election that nobody talks about now would be enough to turn them against the idea of representative democracy. As it turned out, the war was neither short nor successful and has been called the Second 30 Years' War after the 30 Years' War, infamous for its widespread practice of cannibalism by starving Europeans. The Quran in chapter 6, 159, warns against dividing the political religion of the nation into sects, rejoicing in doctrinal differences. Unfortunately, this is what representative democracy does during general elections. The streamlined system of the Chinese Communist Party leaves representative democracies of the West anxious about the decline of empire, with an increasingly restive, unbiddable, and frankly degenerate populace consisting of welfare claimants trailing in its wake. Both capitalism, also known as the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, and communism, known as the dictatorship of the proletariat, are materialist ideologies in dispute over whether capital or labor should control the economy. Measuring national achievement in terms of GDP, gross domestic product, it entirely discounts the spiritual needs of the people. Under secular Koranism, national achievement would be measured in terms of a contentment index, measuring its opposite evidence of distress in the form of death by unnatural causes, including homicides, suicides, accidents, medical errors, alcohol intoxications, and drug overdoses, theft, divorce, as well as the divorce and crime rate. If spirituality is the desire for justice in this life or the next, then should the state not provide this for the people by adopting the best religion with the best available guide to humanity? Is not the best religion the one that worships the most powerful being conceivable, which is already communicated with humanity through the Torah and the Quran? If it is decided that a theocracy is the best political system to bring about economic, political, and social stability, and there are only two divine revelations from the most powerful being conceivable to choose from, surely rational believing Jews would choose the one guaranteeing freedom and belief that explicitly and specifically forbids fornication, with chapter 24, verse 2 of the Quran, without the 36 capital offenses of Judaism. If not, what else but Islamophobia could be the reason? While there are rabbis who promote the Noahide laws to Gentiles, it cannot be denied that the Noahide laws forbidding idolatry and blasphemy would be in conflict with the First Amendment, sacred to Americans. The ideal scenario is that after America recognizes that its founding was based on Islamic principles and adopts Quranic principles of governance, the rest of the West will do so too, including Israel. Once Israel adopts Quranic principles of governance, Israeli Jews will be allowed by its Muslim neighbors peaceful enjoyment of their territory. Once the West adopts Quranic principles of governance, China, India, and Russia would eventually follow if they see a marked improvement in the economies and behavior of Westerners. If not, the government in the West will continue to worsen, and its political class is held in increasing hatred, ridicule, and contempt by those it presumes to govern. America's belligerent foreign policy and dysgenic domestic policy suggest that it is suffering from some kind of virulent moral disease, impelling it towards self-destruction, indifferent to the global destruction it would cause by the breakout of World War III and nuclear Armageddon. It is almost as if America, in its dementia, wants to commit suicide by cop, if only to ensure that no one else can succeed it as the next global superpower. Let us hope that there are still enough wise and courageous men in America to make the difference. But for the existence of 10 good men, Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. Conclusion. Many's a slip twixt the cup and the lip is a saying that comes to mind to those perhaps skeptical of the success of my political agenda. Let us assume all my arguments are sound, but because of the generalized Islamophobia in both Jews and Gentiles, there may not be enough people who will support it. Also, those who agree that it is the only way to reverse degeneracy would be too frightened of unmarried parents who are now the majority to show support for it. Getting it done. Those who want it must ask for it. Also, those who are not certain if they want it must ask if their lives would be improved by a more stable society and economy enjoying better government. As for those who hate it, they will presumably be keeping quiet about it in their hope of depriving it of the oxygen of publicity. Let me put it this way. The correct way to get to the moon and back is still to get inside a space-worthy vessel. The answer is the same whether or not we have access to such a thing. Predictable questions will be asked about how any Western country would adopt secular Koranism when the overwhelming majority of Westerners are Islamophobes. Optimism can be supported by a seminal article by Grayson Keane, the Anglican editor of the Daily Caller. Whether we like it or not, I give a link in there. Whether we like it or not, the Fourth Estate, the term we use to describe the mass media, has now become the First Estate. The First Estate under the Ancien regime was a Catholic church, and as such it was responsible for telling the monarch and his subjects what to think, whom they were, and how to relate to each other, as well as what they should be doing. This role is now being performed by the Fourth Estate. The term Fourth Estate or Fourth Power refers to the press and the news media, both in explicit capacity of advocacy and implicit ability to frame political issues. How did this come about? How did it come to be that 50 years of feminism has destroyed 250 years of liberalism and 2,000 years of Christianity? In a word, America. America does not have an official religion, and this is why America appears to be suffering from amnesia and dementia. It suffers from amnesia because Americans no longer know their own history, if they ever learnt it properly. It suffers from dementia because both its domestic and foreign policy can only be explained as insanity, folly, or evil because promoting the policies of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is clearly satanic, for Satan is rebellion from God, can only cause further degeneracy if not reversed. Americans could in theory correct themselves by challenging and defeating the matriarchy that so many of them now complain about, but they do not. Does Stockholm Syndrome prevent them? Perhaps they are content with the status quo, being too morally apathetic to object to degeneracy and extinction. Or are they not able to formulate the arguments? If this is indeed the problem, I'm here to help. Sexual liberation has led to degeneracy, and degeneracy has led to amnesia, dementia, atheism, and nihilism. Atheism leads to immorality, and by this I mean being unprincipled. A nihilist is an individual who admits he has no principles and is proud to say that he has no principles and scruples because he only sees them as an impediment to his will to power. You cannot have principles if you have no moral principles. You can have no moral principles if you have no religious principles. Without religion, you can have no religious principles which are also moral principles. This means that your society is largely filled with unprincipled men complaining about other unprincipled men, with the only solution being violent revolution and civil war, because none of them any longer trust each other to play by the rules. If atheists do not believe in the existence of the Abrahamic God who will reward good and punish evil in this life or the next, then they will not act as if they thought good will be rewarded and evil punished. An atheist is more likely to lie and commit crimes if he thought he would get away with it. He would regard self-preservation at any cost as a rational lifetime objective. Those who fear death can be easily controlled because all the government needs to do is threaten them with execution. Or if a less lethal form of control is preferred, atheists and nihilists who have made a god of their appetites could easily be bribed. Just like cattle, they can be controlled by carrot and stick. What would you want me to do?
I don't know. I think I saw Mr. Waffles.
Hi, Mr. Waffles.
I don't know. Maybe join. I thought I saw him join.
Yeah, I was hoping you'd say something. Do you want to say something, Mr. Waffles? Have you any comment to make on what you've heard so far? Or shall I continue to read, Chad?
Continue.
All right. It's nearly over.
It's nearly over. It's nearly over.
Page 19. How can atheists and nihilists be persuaded to abandon their nihilism to do the right thing, or speaking the truth as they see it, using sound reasoning bound by moral scruples and adherence to the principles of their official moral system? Atheists and nihilists are not without the capacity to use moral reasoning, but their priorities are skewed. Many have agreed with me that I am right, but declined to support me because they believe I will fail. It will redound to their credit only if I succeed. However, they will suffer loss of status if they support me if I fail. Having become risk-averse women with no principles, Western men have decided that discretion is a better part of valor and deal with me by pretending not to understand what I'm saying. Chad, you may wish to mute yourself so people can hear it more clearly.
Okay, all right, fine.
Thank you, Chad. Most people would support a righteous cause if they believe victory to be at hand. The problem is that most men are feminized and risk-averse cowards and hypocrites who regard even loss of approval by strangers as a sacrifice too great to be made, as an affront to their personal dignity which cannot be endured. A vision of the future must therefore be painted, which will be appealing even to atheists and nihilists, giving the narrative of an easy victory in a righteous cause. Maslow's hierarchy of needs are as follows. 1. Physiological needs. 2. Safety needs. 3. Love and social needs. 4. Esteem needs. 5. Cognitive needs. 6. Self-actualization. 7. Transcendence needs. Let us assume that the nihilist is now a member of the ruling class. If you were an absolute monarch, which would be your next ambition? It must be the love of those those you govern as well as your friends and family. Even if you knew everyone loved you and you were worthy of it, you would fear death. If you believed in the afterlife, you would want to go to the better place. Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. What would give the wearer ease? Knowing he is doing the right thing and being praised and loved for it. But people do complain. If the king believed in God and felt he was obeying God's laws to the best of his ability, then he would still enjoy spiritual ease. The atheist and narcissistic absolute monarch would be bent on imposing his will on others and be subject to mood swings. At times, he would feel that he was in control and doing the right thing because he's loved and praised, but at other times he would feel loss of control and paranoia. Belief in God would make the ruler feel divinely protected if he has a clear conscience that he has been acting for the best possible reasons. A theocracy would have the effect of using God to legitimize the moral system being imposed on the governed, making them more likely to accept its wisdom and justice from generation to generation, increasing the job satisfaction of the ruler. How are the capricious and suggestible people with pronounced character defects subject to mood swings to be persuaded? Through the media, of course. If the fourth estate is now the first estate, then any major media outlet prepared to give saturation coverage of secular Koranism would do the trick of persuading people. The sheeple can be persuaded to believe in almost anything. Also, atheists and nihilists can be persuaded to believe in almost anything if they are frightened enough or bribed enough. Pretend to believe in almost anything. Yes. In any society, there are bound to be dissidents, but a balance between individual liberty and what is necessary to keep the group in existence and apart from others is necessary to keep most people feeling that the rules are fair enough and that the best possible people in their group are in charge. Intersectional feminism is, of course, the antithesis of this, and this explains why it is now frightened of its own shadow, jumping at the slightest noise. It already knows its time is up. Think of the personification of the world's number one superpower, a transgender Uncle Sam who has had his sex change operation and is now drinking in the last chance saloon, picking fights with anyone who is smaller and weaker than him. He considers squaring up to someone who is capable of punching his lights out, but decides against it. But transgender Uncle Sam has a gun. He chooses not to fight with anyone in the bar because wearing a skirt and heels which will not give him the advantage in a pub brawl. If he challenges anyone for a fight in the car park, he's not quite certain that the bystanders who hate him will not refrain from taking an opportunity to land a punch or a kick. So he chooses to go on a shooting spree before committing suicide by cop. His gun in his car in the parking lot, and he goes to get it. How can we stop World War III from breaking out? By speaking the truth as we see it. Long-standing social problems that have been festering for a century will not and cannot be solved by more voting and more stolen elections. When the evil is global, the policies that cause this evil must be acknowledged before correction can take place. For this reason, the narrative of the Abrahamic God is irresistible even to atheists and nihilists who fear for the future. What is required is saturation and global coverage of secular Koranism, which the West is capable of doing, since we already know that global media is controlled by the CIA. If the West is going to change its moral system, it would want everyone else to do the same thing too, and this must be managed properly and carefully. While the West still resembles an advanced society and the American empire is still in existence, it can do these things with more authority and drama. After the collapse, it will be heeded less. After all, economic collapse is imminent. The manifest destiny of an exceptional and indispensable nation could be fulfilled, but perhaps not in a way those who first coined those words imagined. America, being an act America beginning an act of global repentance, wearing sackcloth and ashes, will fulfill the manifest destiny of an exceptional nation that is the Republic of America, indispensable for making Islam go global when Americans repent of their sins of Christianity, and finally complete the project of the Founding Fathers. Formally rejecting Christianity after declaring it to be totalitarian as well as idolatry and blasphemy would attract a global gasp of surprise. Adopting secular Koranism with American characteristics by implementing the following legislative program would make global opinion agog with curiosity. 1. U.S. Supreme Court to identify, list, and number the commandments of Allah in the Quran capable of being made into legislation, to incorporate Quranic principles of governance into the new U.S. Constitution. 2. George Washington's farewell speech to be also incorporated into the new Constitution. 3. Legislation identified to be in conflict with the above repeal, banning all other political parties other than the National Party of America, with the principle of governing in the American national interest, conforming to Quranic principles of warfare and international relations and foreign policy. In foreign policy, economic, social, and gender justice in domestic policy would be implemented in harmony with Quranic principles. How could atheists and nihilists be bribed to support secular Koranism? Even atheists and nihilists would see the benefit of lower taxes, fewer laws and wars, as well as a stable currency, a stable economy with laws supporting stable marriages, stable families, and stable homes for the legitimate children of married parents to grow up in. Persuading unmarried parents to get with the program. What if you are already an unmarried parent fearing public corporal punishment? Fear not, for there will be a period of grace of a year in which unmarried parents will not be lashed 100 times in public. So basically, after secular Koranism is established, no one is going to be suffering corporal punishment if they give birth. Until the year is over, so which is enough time, I think, for people to get used to the idea. Quranic credit score. To encourage repentance, there will be a list of early bird repentant unmarried parents. The higher on the list you are, the more repentant you will be deemed to be, and this will go towards your brownie point in your Quranic credit score. To incentivize participation, some reward could be given for the first early repentant unmarried parent, the first 10, the first 100, the first 1,000, the first 10,000, etc. Your Quranic credit score will be based on your ability to solve problems using truth, logic, and Quranic principles. Examinations in Quranic knowledge. There will be examinations in Quranic knowledge for primary and secondary school children. For primary schools, the test will be multiple choice. For secondary schools, the test will be the written essay. The first-year law student will be expected to comment on the process of identifying, listing, and numbering the commandments of Allah capable of being made into legislation, necessitating the reading of the Quran in its entirety and the passing of its verses capable of being made into legislation. State-run marriage bureaus. To make marriage the serious business it should be between the parties to the marriage, the state will offer the service of pairing up marriageable men and women with each other if they require assistance after ensuring they satisfy a marriageability test. Remedial classes in marriageability. If they fail to satisfy the requirement of being marriageable, they will be offered remedial classes in marriageability. The marriage contract. For those who satisfy the marriageability test, the state will assist them in agreeing the terms of the marriage contract by explaining the nature and purpose of marriage and its implicit terms. There will be the standard contract for the average citizen and the bespoke contract for wealthy individuals who want to make their own arrangements using their own legal advisors. joint appointment by the couple of the friend of the marriage. Before the couple can marry, they would have to agree on the appointment of a friend of the marriage whose purpose is to support the marriage impartially. It is meant by this that the friend of the marriage would be more interested in supporting the marriage than either of the parties to the marriage. Should the friend of the marriage become unavailable or is dismissed, the couple must as soon as possible agree on the replacement, or one will be appointed for them when there arises any matrimonial disputes to be settled. After marriage service, a matrimonial disputes tribunal will be ready to deal with any matrimonial disputes arising so that there will be a record of the history of the marriage. Matrimonial disputes appeal tribunal. This could be the pre-divorce stage of proceedings if the matrimonial dispute cannot be satisfactorily resolved. Apportionment of blame for divorce. Even if the couple divorced amicably and refused to blame each other, blame would be apportioned at 50-50. This is because they are both equally to blame for having married the wrong person. Divorce registry. The divorce registry will have a list of divorces with the apportionment of blame specified and the causes categorized. For example, money, adultery, incompatibility, unreasonable behavior, etc. State education. Legitimate children of married parents will go to A schools. Illegitimate offspring of unmarried parents will go to B schools. Doubtless ambitious teachers would want to teach in the more challenging B schools, but state provision of educational facilities will be equal. Secondary education will be in single-sex schools. Environmental and demographic concerns controlling the birth rate. There are some who want it to go up and others who want it to go down. This method provides government with an indispensable and easy-to-operate control mechanism, regulating the supply of the contraceptive pill only to registered prostitutes and mothers deemed to have completed their families when they have the required number of children. The number can be raised and lowered as required. The reintroduction of slavery. Since slavery was forbidden in neither the Bible nor the Quran, it follows that the British and Americans had no business abolishing it. In any case, sex slavery is an institution like marriage and prostitution. Institutions should be regulated, not criminalized, to protect the rights of the parties. Without indentured servitude, which is...
No. Well, we don't do that.